There comes a moment in life when a person stands at the edge of who they have always been and who they are being called to become. That moment is not comfortable. It is not easy. It is not natural for someone who has spent years building walls, mastering distance, and finding safety in silence. But when that person begins to change, not because they were forced, not because they were pressured, but because something within them has awakened, you are witnessing something sacred. Understand this deeply. When someone who avoids closeness starts moving toward it, they are walking against the current of their own conditioning. Every step they take toward you is a step away from fear. Every word they speak, instead of suppressing, is an act of courage. This is not small. This is transformation. Yet wisdom teaches us something important. Change is not declared, it is demonstrated, not in intensity, but in consistency, not in grand gestures, but in quiet repeated choices. The truth of their intention will not be found in what they say when emotions are high, but in what they do when things are calm, ordinary, and real. Divine principles remind us growth requires discomfort. A seed must break before it becomes a tree. Likewise, a guarded heart must open, even when it trembles. If they are choosing to stay present instead of disappearing, to speak instead of shutting down, to understand instead of retreating, then they are doing the inner work that many never dare to begin. But do not lose yourself in their transformation. You are not here to fix, to chase, or to prove your worth. You are here to witness, to discern, and to stand in your own truth. Because real love is not built on potential. It is built on alignment. It is not sustained by hope alone, but by effort that meets effort. If they truly want to change, you will not have to convince them. You will not have to beg for consistency. You will not have to question where you stand. Their actions will answer you more clearly than any words ever could. And if that change is real, it will not just move toward you, it will move toward wholeness within themselves. So stand grounded. Observe with wisdom, receive with clarity. And remember, the right connection does not require you to shrink your needs. It rises to meet them. Because when transformation is genuine, it does not confuse you. It reveals truth, restores balance, and brings peace where there was once uncertainty. Words can be powerful, but they are also the easiest currency to spend when emotions are high. Anyone can promise change in a moment of fear, loss, or realization. Anyone can speak beautifully about becoming better, doing better, or loving better, or loving better. But true transformation does not live in those emotional peaks. It lives in the quiet, ordinary moments where no one is watching and nothing is being demanded. Consistency is the language of truth. It is the steady rhythm of actions that repeat over time, even when it is inconvenient, even when it is uncomfortable, and especially when there is no immediate reward. When someone who has a pattern of avoidance begins to change, their growth will not appear as a sudden perfect shift. Instead, it will show itself in small, deliberate choices made again and again. It may look like staying present in a conversation instead of withdrawing when things feel overwhelming. It may be responding thoughtfully instead of disappearing into silence. It may be checking in, following through, or simply showing up in ways they once resisted. These actions may seem simple on the surface, but for someone who is used to emotional distance, they represent a profound internal shift. Promises often come from intention, but consistency comes from discipline. Intention says, I want to change. Discipline says, I will keep choosing change, even when it is hard. This distinction matters because intention can fade as quickly as it appears, while disciplined action builds trust over time. And trust is not built in a day, it is built in patterns. There is also a deeper wisdom to understand. Consistency reveals alignment between what a person says and who they are becoming. When actions and words begin to match, there is integrity. When they do not, there is confusion. And confusion is often a sign that the change being expressed has not yet taken root. Emotional moments can create the illusion of growth. Apologies can feel sincere. Declarations can sound convincing. But if those words are not followed by repeated, grounded action, they remain unanswered. Real change anchors itself in behavior that becomes reliable, predictable, and stable over time. It is also important to recognize that consistency does not mean perfection. There may still be moments of hesitation, moments of fear, even moments of regression, but the difference lies in the return. A person who is truly changing will come back to their commitment. They will correct themselves, re-engage, and continue forward instead of retreating permanently into old patterns. Over time, consistency transforms doubt into clarity. You no longer have to analyze every word or question every intention, because the pattern becomes visible, the effort becomes undeniable, and what was once uncertain begins to feel steady. This is how trust is rebuilt, not through intensity, but through repetition, not through promises, but through proof. And that proof is not something you chase or demand. It is something that reveals itself naturally when change is real. Growth does not happen in comfort. It never has, and it never will. For someone who has built their identity around emotional distance, self-protecting, on and control, comfort is found in avoidance. It is found in keeping feelings at a distance, in withdrawing before things get too intense, in maintaining a sense of safety by never fully stepping into vulnerability. So when that person begins to change, the first and clearest sign is not confidence. It is discomfort. They start doing things that feel unnatural to them. They stay in conversations that stir emotions instead of escaping them. They sit with feelings they once buried. They allow themselves to be seen even when every instinct tells them to shut down or pull away. This is not easy for them. It can feel like losing control, like stepping into uncertainty, without a clear sense of safety. But this discomfort is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of courage. There is a quiet bravery in choosing to remain present when everything inside says to retreat. There is strength in opening up, knowing that vulnerability carries the risk of being misunderstood, rejected, or hurt. For someone who is used to avoiding these risks at all costs, leaning into them is a profound shift in behavior and mindset. Willingness is the key here. They may not get it right every time. They may stumble, hesitate, or struggle to express themselves clearly. But if they are truly changing, they will keep trying. They will not use discomfort as an excuse to return permanently to old habits. Instead, they will recognize it as part of the process. Discomfort becomes a teacher. It reveals where growth is needed. It exposes the fears that have been running beneath the surface for years. And when someone chooses to face those fears, rather than run from them, they begin to rewrite their patterns. It is important to understand that this willingness cannot be forced. It cannot be demanded or created through pressure. It must come from within. It is a conscious decision to grow, even when growth fee. Their nervous system is already tired. Endeavor system is already tired. What's felt uncomfortable begins to feel more natural. Conversations become easier. Emotional presence becomes less threatening. The walls that once felt necessary start to lose their purpose. But the foundation of that transformation is always the same. A repeated choice to step into discomfort instead of away from it. One of the clearest indicators of real change is the shift from defensiveness to accountability. For someone who has spent a long time protecting themselves through avoidance, defensiveness often becomes second nature. It is a shield, quick explanations, subtle blame shifting, or complete withdrawal when confronted. These reactions are not always intentional. They are learned patterns designed to protect the self from discomfort, shame, or perceived criticism. But growth begins the moment that shield is lowered. Accountability is not about admitting fault to please someone else. It is about recognizing one's own patterns with honesty and without distortion. Without distortion, it requires a person to look at their behavior and say, "This is mine. I see it, I understand how it affects you, and I am willing to take responsibility for it." That level of self-awareness is not easy, especially for someone who has built their identity around emotional distance. When accountability replaces defensiveness, the tone of interaction changes. Instead of arguments that go in circles, there is reflection. Instead of shutting down or walking away, there is engagement. Instead of denying or minimizing, there is acknowledgement. These shifts may appear subtle, but they carry deep meaning because they show that the person is no longer prioritizing self-protection over truth. There is also humility in accountability. It requires letting go of the need to always be right, the need to justify every action, or the need to avoid discomfort at all costs. It invites a person to sit with the reality that they have caused hurt or contributed to a problem, not as a form of self-judgment, but as a step toward growth. True accountability also includes a willingness to repair. It is not just about saying, "I was wrong," but about asking, "How can I do better?" and then following that with action. It is seen in changed behavior, in more thoughtful responses, and in a genuine effort to prevent the same patterns from repeating. For someone who tends to avoid emotional depth, this level of ownership can feel incredibly vulnerable. It exposes parts of themselves they may have kept hidden, even from their own awareness. It removes the safety of deflection and replaces it with clarity, and clarity can feel intense because it leaves little room to hide. Yet, this is where transformation deepens. When a person consistently chooses accountability, they begin to build trust, not just with others, but within themselves. They start to see that facing their actions does not destroy them, it strengthens them. They learn that responsibility is not a burden, but a pathway to more authentic connection. Over time, defensiveness loses its grip. The need to protect the ego becomes less urgent than the desire to grow. And in that shift, relationships begin to feel more grounded, more honest, and more real, because they are no longer built on avoidance, but on truth that is acknowledged and owned. Communication is the bridge between two inner worlds. For someone who has long relied on silence, distance, or emotional withdrawal, that bridge may have remained unbuilt, or only partially formed. Avoidance often teaches a person that it is safer not to speak, safer not to reveal too much, safer to keep thoughts and feelings contained, where they cannot be challenged or misunderstood. So when change begins, it reveals itself in the way a person starts to use their voice. Open communication does not mean perfect expression. It does not mean having all the right words or always knowing how to articulate complex emotions. In fact, in the beginning, it may come out imperfect, hesitant, or even unclear. But what matters is the effort, the willingness to try, to speak, to share something that once would have been kept hidden. Instead of shutting down during difficult conversations, they begin to stay present. Instead of disappearing when emotions rise, they attempt to engage. They may take pauses, they may struggle, but they do not completely retreat. This alone signals a meaningful shift because it shows they are choosing connection over avoidance. There is also honesty that starts to emerge. Not just surface level responses, but deeper expressions of thoughts, fears, and needs. They begin to say what they feel instead of expecting others to guess. They begin to express discomfort instead of masking it. And while this vulnerability can feel unfamiliar, it creates space for real understanding to develop. Open communication also includes listening. It is not only about speaking, but about receiving. When someone is changing, they begin to listen without immediately becoming defensive or shutting down. They allow another person's perspective to exist, even when it is difficult to hear. This kind of listening builds emotional safety, because it shows respect for the connection itself. Consistency plays a role here as well. One honest conversation is not enough to establish a new pattern. It is the repeated effort to communicate again and again that creates trust. Over time, the silence that once defined the relationship is replaced with dialogue. The distance begins to close, not through force, but through mutual understanding. It is important to recognize that this process can feel overwhelming for someone who is not used to it. Sharing thoughts and emotions may bring up fear of judgment, fear of rejection, or fear of losing control. These fears do not disappear instantly, but if the desire to grow is genuine, they will continue to move through those fears rather than retreating back into silence. As communication opens, clarity replaces confusion. You no longer have to interpret silence or guess intentions. There is space to address misunderstandings, to express needs, and to build something that is rooted in honesty rather than assumption. And in that space, connection begins to feel less fragile and more real because it is supported by words that are spoken, heard, and understood. When someone begins to prioritize a relationship, it is no longer treated as something secondary or optional. For a person who is used to maintaining distance, independence often comes first, and emotional connection may exist only when it feels convenient or safe. But real change shifts that perspective. The relationship is no longer something they fit into the leftover spaces of their life. It becomes something they intentionally make space for. This shift is not always loud or dramatic. It often appears in quiet, meaningful ways. They begin to include you in their decisions, considering how their actions affect you rather than acting in isolation. They make time not just when it suits them, but because they recognize that presence is essential for connection to grow. Effort becomes visible in how they show up, how they follow through, and how they remain engaged even when life becomes busy or complicated. Prioritizing the relationship also means valuing emotional presence, It is not just about physical availability, but about being mentally and emotionally engaged. They listen more attentively, respond more thoughtfully, and make an effort to understand rather than dismiss or overlook. This kind of presence creates a sense of being seen and valued, which is something avoidance often prevents. There is also a willingness to adjust. Patterns that once created distance begin to be questioned. Habits that once protected their independence at the cost of connection start to soften. This does not mean they lose themselves, but rather that they learn how to balance their individuality with the needs of the relationship. That balance requires awareness and intention, because it asks them to step beyond what has always felt natural. Sacrifice, in a healthy sense, becomes part of this process, not in a way that creates resentment, but in a way that reflects care. They may give up certain comforts, certain privileged ways of coping, or certain routines that kept others at a distance. These changes are not forced. They are chosen because the relationship holds value. Over time, prioritization creates stability. You begin to feel that you matter, not because of what is said, but because of what is said, but because of what is consistently done. The relationship is no longer uncertain or one-sided. It becomes something that is nurtured, protected, and actively maintained through effort that is both visible and sustained. Ned, thank you for your time, your presence, and the space you've shared here. It truly matters. Goodbye for now, and may your path ahead be filled with clarity, growth, and peace.